Hi there, and welcome to our YouTube channel. My name's Bryony, and I'm the head of coaching here at Relish. And today I'm talking to you about Ditch the Divorce, how to get the marriage help that you need. The moment when divorce becomes an option is a significant one. For most people, this thought emerges after one more fight, one more disappointment, or the irrevocable thought that perhaps things are too broken to fix, or perhaps even worse, that you may not want to try anymore. These kinds of situations and feelings usually arise after months or years of frustration or discontentment, and often when we unpack what's happened, with the benefit of hindsight and lots of reflection, we can see a long path of winding miscommunication, resentment, unmet expectations, and a gradual shutting down of emotions and vulnerability. It takes a lot for two people who love each other to make the decision to go their separate ways, and it can be an incredibly painful process to take apart a life that's been built together. With that in mind, it can be useful at any stage of the relationship to take stock of how things are going and try and resolve issues that are coming up for you now, rather than having them compound over the years until things reach breaking point. This isn't to say that divorce isn't always the wrong decision. Some relationships are just not meant to last, but rather that getting help early on can help both people to make important changes in their behaviour and communication. With that in mind, let's talk about some signs that it might be time to get marriage help and what this might look like for you. So unsurprisingly, most relationship counselling is taken up with couples who are in the midst of a crisis, whether this is after an infidelity, when divorce is on the table, or when things have deteriorated so much between two individuals that they need a third person to mediate. That said, there is a small subgroup of people who seek out relationship counselling as a preventative measure to iron out issues in the relationship, or perhaps to stop those issues from arising. For most people, however, there are some signs that this is a good time to seek additional support. Firstly, you're having the same argument. We may sometimes feel like it's Groundhog Day in our relationships, with similar issues such as money, parenting, communication, cleanliness, coming up again and again with no sign of change or resolution. This might be because the communication is off, or because there's insufficient motivation to change. Whatever the reason, having the same argument is like poison to a relationship. Instead of growing and changing together, we are instead stuck in a cycle of resentment and frustration, with the creeping realization that perhaps change just isn't possible. Seeking relationship coaching or counselling or support for this is highly recommended, since a third person in the room can offer different perspectives on an unsolvable issue and mediate between two sets of needs and desires. Not just that, they can also shed light on patterns of destructive communication that might be emerging, for example, escalating, shutting down, or stonewalling, and plan for future incidents and how these might be managed. Another thing to look for, you are emotionally and physically disconnected. Arguably, just as bad as high conflict is emotional disconnection. We all know how awful it can be to be in a room with someone we love, but not feel comfortable showing love or affection. Sometimes emotional withdrawal is one of the only ways we may feel we can protect ourselves from further hurt. But this can often result in both people stepping further and further away from each other in a self-protective dance. We may feel the need to punish our partner by withdrawing, but this can also create more distance. And over time, if this pattern is repeated, it can start to feel like this is the norm. Often this kind of dynamic arises from poor communication and unmet needs, and even the misguided attempt to establish some personal space. But it can often result in feeling like a stranger to our partner. Again, counselling and coaching can be imperative in addressing issues like this, since being in a safe setting, such as a therapist's office or a counsellor's room, can allow people to express vulnerability and hurt that might not have been possible to talk about with their partner. Often at the core of disconnection is hurt on both sides, and it's hard to find ways of talking about this if the relationship feels cold and unsupportive. So professional help is strongly recommended for these issues. Another thing to look out for is if there are others involved. When our relationships aren't meeting our needs in any number of ways, we can sometimes look outside of them for people to meet those needs. This is not just emotional. Many people have found themselves crossing the line with emotional affairs or intense friendships that act as gap fillers for relationships that are faltering. Often these outside supports aren't relationships or partners that would actually work in real life, but they can actually represent something that we're missing in our partner and which seems alluring and enticing in the other. If you or your partner are noticing that you're getting close to this line, which is something that's different in each relationship, obviously, it might be a sign that it's time to talk about what might be missing in your dynamic. Depending on how far things have gone, this might simply be a conversation where you discuss these feelings or thoughts, or if things have progressed too far, some professional help might be useful to help you work through what's happened. Whatever the situation, it is really useful to remember that we can be drawn to others because they represent something that we are missing, and identifying what that missing thing is can help move your relationship forward and into the future if both people are willing to listen. There are other signs that it might be time to seek help, like big disconnects in values, addiction issues, one or both people struggling with mental health, or issues with money and parenting. And generally, you will probably know that it is time to seek help if you're feeling miserable and unsatisfied in the relationship. In some cases, this can actually be a turning point. Acknowledging that things are not good means that we can stop pretending that everything's fine, and instead use that energy to understand just what has been going wrong. It might be some comfort to know that many, many happy couples that we see today have at some point sought relationship counselling to improve their relationships, and that it's not an admission of defeat, but rather an acknowledgement that living with someone for the long term is difficult and challenging, and that sometimes we can just need some help. With that in mind, here are some ideas about how to find help or start to get a different perspective on your relationship, from the easiest, cheapest options to the more intensive and resource-heavy options. So first of all, we'll look at some books which have been helpful for lots of people. So one comforting thing to consider if you're having relationship issues is that you are certainly not alone. There are literally thousands of books that have been written about relationships and love, and most of them have useful, if somewhat conflicting, advice. So here's a list of books that are amongst the most popular in the field. There are many more, and you can search for these at your local library or on Amazon. Most of the books in the area have been written by licensed relationship counsellors and work on the understanding that the more we understand about ourselves and our internal world, the better equipped we are to have good relationships, since we can recognise our irrational thoughts or overreactions more as attempts to protect ourselves or have our needs met by our partners, and fundamentally to avoid hurt and panic. So first of all, a great book is Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. So this is a great resource if there are issues in the bedroom. It's an overview of why couples might get out of sync sexually, as well as the differences in libido that can occur in a relationship. It's incredibly useful for men and women to read, and it's just really, really helpful, particularly if there's differences in desire and satisfaction. Secondly, What Makes Love Last by John Gottman, MD. So this is another great resource for anyone in a relationship who's wanting to keep things positive and loving. The Gottmans are world leaders in relationship therapy and have a wealth of knowledge and experience, all of which is based on really well carried out research. Another great resource is Attached by Amir, Levine and Rachel Heller. So this is a good resource for people wanting to know more about attachment theory, which is something that drives many of us in a relationship. For most people, understanding their own attachment style and that of their partner allows them to recognise patterns and dynamics that are causing conflict, and then to change their behaviour accordingly. This book is very readable and very relatable. So I'll just mention quickly as well that most of these titles are available at your local library, and you should be able to find that online and also listen to them as audiobooks. And also, like I mentioned, you can get them on Audible or Amazon or anywhere that sells books. Another good resource is The All or Nothing Marriage by Eli Finkel. This is a really good book that gives an overview of how our expectations for marriage have changed in modern times and how we might set expectations within the relationship to make things work a bit better. So he talks a bit about how in the past, marriages weren't necessarily about liking each other, they were more convenient. So how we can kind of adjust our expectations that perhaps our partner isn't going to be able to meet all of our needs in life. So maybe they won't be our best friend or our most fun social partner, but perhaps that we can adjust our expectations and have a happy relationship because of that. So in terms of podcasts, I definitely recommend a podcast called Where Should We Begin, which is hosted by Esther Perel, the wonderful relationship therapist. So she's one of the greatest relationship counsellors out there, and she takes us through a relationship counselling session in each episode with a really great variety of clients and different presentations. So each episode is different and allows us a glimpse into how other people manage their relationships. She's also got a good podcast about work, and she takes a wonderful perspective on, what makes relationships tick. Another one is Small Things Often by the Gottman Institute. So again, this is that fantastic resource that provides tips about improving connection and communications in relationships, as well as addressing existing issues. And they've got really practical tips that can be incredibly helpful. Another one is Unlocking Us with Brené Brown. So you've probably heard of Brené Brown. She's a leading researcher on human behaviour and areas such as vulnerability, shame and connection. Her podcast, Unlocking Us, is a really good resource for anyone wanting to understand more about how we interact with each other and how we show up for each other in our day-to-day life. So another thing to think about is relationship coaching apps. So the next step after books and podcasts might be to look at relationship apps. These are often reasonably low cost and offer relationship training tips, often content that's centered around common issues like communication, sex, intimacy, and trust. So I'm definitely biased, but I would recommend our relationship coaching app, which is Relish. So Relish is essentially a relationship training app offering coaching and a large library of lessons about communication, intimacy, conflict, attachment, and boundary setting. It's kind of part of a new type of relationship therapy which provides information and guidance about how to manage major issues. It offers coach support and guidance if needed. One of the major benefits of relationship training apps like Relish is that they're reasonably low cost compared to regular therapy. So they can be a really good place to start if you're interested in addressing issues in the relationship, but you're not quite sure about starting therapy, or maybe it's just not the right time for you. You can sign up for a free trial of Relish for 1 week before you choose to subscribe, which gives you a chance to try out the coaching application and also read through the content to see if it's for you. In terms of other options, there's also online therapy. So maybe you've felt like things have progressed to a level where you'd like to see someone for regular therapy, and you're hoping that having someone else in the room will help mediate and navigate some of those more challenging conversations. So there's a few services which are well regarded. First of all, BetterHelp. So seeking therapy online has never been easier, with trained psychologists, marriage and family therapists, clinical social workers, and board licensed professional counsellors. So with BetterHelp, you're able to select couples and relationship therapists with most online counselling services, and you can read the therapist's background and experience before your first session. In terms of face-to-face therapy, as useful as online therapy is, sometimes we can miss that face-to-face support and the experience of actually being in the same room as your therapist. So that might not necessarily be possible during COVID times, but the website Psychology Today has a Find a Therapist function on its website where you can browse the profile of therapists near to you based on location and zip code. You can also search Good Therapy to find a therapist near you, and pretty much all of them at the moment offer either telehealth, which is over the internet, or face-to-face. Another idea to think about is couples retreats. So this is an interesting take on couples therapy, that you can actually go to couples retreats, which are generally held in country locations and involve small groups of people with licensed therapists. This can be really effective, though obviously expensive. It's a good way to make changes and see improvements in relationships. And just like with group therapy, it can be really powerful to observe other couples and witness how they work through their issues. There's likely to be couples retreats in your area if you research, but also the Gottman Institute holds these regularly. So check out their website if you're interested in that. So you might be asking now, lots of options, what do I do first? So depending on what stage your relationship is in, it might be useful to do one or several of these things. It's also useful to consider what type of help your partner is going to be willing to engage in. For example, for some people, the idea of getting relationship counselling is frightening or confronting, whereas they might be much more open to downloading a relationship coaching app that has more self-directed activities and less confrontational conversations, and maybe they can learn some things about skills and strategies before they jump in the deep end. It's also useful to consider what kind of changes are possible for you. And is it possible to repair things? For some couples, there may have been too much hurt that's happened and too many arguments and hurtful things said, which has covered up what brought them together in the first place. For those couples, the challenge might be in separating gracefully and with a minimum of hurt. For many couples, however, change is certainly possible and is often sparked by a crisis, for example, a big argument, a fork in the road, followed by an acknowledgement of the issue, followed by the question, what do we do about this? When you're going through this process, it's also useful to remember that the change can be gradual. We might not feel like we're making progress, but it's only when we look back at how things were that we can see that, in fact, a lot of progress has been made. So this might look like better self-awareness, arguing in a different way, being more understanding of each other, or finding ways of managing old issues and conflicts. For many people, the process of getting marriage help, whether this is reading a book or seeing a therapist or coach, allows them to view their relationship differently, as a living, breathing thing, open to change, needing ongoing attention and care, sometimes great and always perfectly imperfect. Often adjusting our expectations of what we need from our partners and vice versa can help us to get along better with them and be less sensitive to annoyances and disappointments. So what are you waiting for? Whatever stage you're in, start by downloading a podcast or writing out a list of your hopes for your relationship. It really is never too late to start, and it's likely that you'll be glad that you did. I wish you all the luck with it.